Hello and welcome to Painted Haint. I'm your host, Adri, and today we're going to be talking about a city that is very much tied to the Christmas season, and that is the city has been with us forever. It was founded in AD 43 by Emperor Claudius, who's a Roman emperor, and London actually started out as a village. It was just a very small town that the Romans took over. They would call it Londinium. We don't really know the origins of Londinium. It's been said that it was maybe tied to a Saxon word, but we're not really sure on like where the origins came from. So if you do know the origins, please drop it in the comments. So the city itself was dissected into three neighborhoods or three centers to be exact. So you had the walled settlement, Southwark, and the city of Westminster. And so this is what begins London. So, like I said, the city's been here for eons. So, there's going to be some ghosts. And FYI, I have a couple of TikToks about about the underground because their transit system has a lot of creepy ghost stories. One that includes Queen Boudica, who was this warrior queen who supposedly haunts one of the underground stations. So that's on my TikTok if you want to see that. And I might do a couple more because they didn't get into this video. But let's get back to the vid. So the plague pits. So as a nursing student, I feel that I have to start off with some medical history. And actually, most of this video is tied to medical history because some of the stuff is actually in my textbook as it relates to epidemiology or the treatment of patients or lack thereof. But we're going to start with the plague pits. So when I say plague pits, I'm referring to the plague pits from the bubonic plague. So the year is 1665 in London, and the plague has started. So this is an illness. So okay, first of all, the illness was actually endemic. So it had already been making its rounds around Europe, but this one is the worst. So the illness is spread by bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is what causes the bubonic plague. And 1600s London was the perfect place for this bacterium to breed. Because 1600s London was like, I literally put in the script, it was grotty. Like, it was disgusting. Hygiene was not a thing. There was no sanitation. Drains were open and flowed in the center of the street. And if you know that, like, if you're a history person, you probably already know this, but if you don't, just know that it was pretty gross. This led to streets being awash with the foulest liquids imaginable, combined with all sorts of excrement. And the city did hire these people called rakers to rake up this muck, and they would put it outside the city, outside the walled city, which will make it worse because now like this stuff is basically decomposing and baking in the heat, and God knows what is breeding in it. So you can see where we're going. In the poorer areas of the city, it was far worse. Due to overcrowding. That is, it was far worse as far as sanitation or lack thereof, and far worse as far as the plague itself. So, like I said, you can see where this is going. So, the first reports of the bubonic plague will occur in, I kept calling it St. Gilles because I don't know, but St. Giles in the Fields just outside the city in spring of 1665. Cases and deaths will rapidly increase as the year progressed. And the way basically that this illness got into the city is by rats and the fleas that came with them. And so, side note, Yersinia pestis, the bubonic plague, is not a communicable disease in the way that, like, if you cough on somebody, you'll get it. It's more so like the person is bitten by an infected flea or an infected rat, and that's how it gets around London. So in other words, it's not directly contagious, is what the article I read said. So the deaths began to death. I could not think of a better term for that. So, for example, 7,165 Londoners would die in 1 week. And this was actually later on in the plague. Like, this is around August. So it starts in spring. And so this is like, well, August, September. So officials tried to place these victims in proper graves. This is where we get into the pits. So in churches, churchyards, graveyards. But soon that fell by the wayside because they just had to bury these people somewhere. So massive pits were dug to accommodate the amount of people who needed to be buried. So it's estimated, or it is, well, yeah, it's estimated that 68,656 deaths were recorded, but it's been said that over 100,000 people, if not more, died. So you can see how large these pits can be with those two numbers, because both are large numbers. I don't care who you are. So till this day, these pits exist all over the city, and I'll pop a map up right here for you. And if you look at some of the names of these places, it tells the story of the plague, which I find interesting. I find that interesting about the English language in general. Like, I guess in American English, we really don't think about the names of places. But in the UK, in the UK, it's kind of like they obviously thought about, why they named these places, gave these names to these places. So, for example, you have Pitfield Street, and I believe that's Hoxton. It might be Hoxton too. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. In the Hackney area of London, people who live in the area are told not to walk on the grass where the pit sits, and I guess in respect, or not I guess, but in respect for the people who passed away. Then there is Vinegar Alley, so named because vinegar was used around that pit in Vinegar Alley as a form of disinfectant. So I guess they had some idea of like what might clean up a plague or an illness, but it was really kind of to no avail. So in my research, I found an inordinate amount of plague pits found near underground stations. And I had to think about it, and I thought, well, if they're digging, of course they're going to literally going to dig through history and find some of these pits. So the one that sticks out to me is the Elizabeth line, and the construction on this line actually had to be delayed because they found bodies, so remains. Scientists estimated that the people's remains found in the pit died during the 16th century, and likely it was due to this particular plague. And of course, there are other stations that hold these pits, including Aldgate Station, and then there's the Bakerloo line, which is part of another station. Now we're going to go to Bethlehem Royal Hospital. So on to another London medical disaster. So it was also, or the original name was St. Mary Bethlehem, or AKA Bedlam. You've probably heard the term Bedlam, but we're like, why are they naming it that? We'll get to that in a second. So this is a psychiatric hospital that is notorious for the treatment of its patients. It would move to Mooresfield in 1676, following the Great Fire of London in the year 1666. That's wild. Then to St. George Fields in Southwark in the early 1800s. It would make its final move to Monk's Orchard in 1930. So from the start, Bethlehem was not the place to be. First off, they called the patients inmates. Not cool. That is not. And I know people are going to be like, well, it's from like back in the day or whatever. No, I don't care what year you coming from. If you have a patient, you don't call them an inmate. Really? So that was like red flag number one. The hospital was built over a sewer that served the hospital and the surrounding areas of the surrounding neighborhood. And because of this, the drain would regularly block up, causing overflows of sewage at the entrance of the hospital. So imagine you're dropping off your loved one, um, and you pull up and there's just sewage everywhere, and you're just like, okay then. So that's a red flag number two. Um, Officials also complained in the 1500s that the place was filthily kept, hence the name Bedlam. So, yet, in Bedlam, by the way, Bedlam just means like freaking mass chaos. Like, it's not great. Yet, they did nothing to better the conditions of the hospital because, let's face it, they did not see the patients as humans. I mean, I read a couple of articles that said that the hospital's like inventory showed manacles and stocks. I'm going to post a picture of what manacles and stocks are. And you tell me if your local, general hospital or ER has such things for just general practice. Not for like patients who are like wild, out of control, but like for general practice. So the patient's conditions, that is their illnesses, range from learning disabilities to epilepsy or falling sickness. That was the term that they used, and dementia. And there were probably many more illnesses that these people had. And these patients were usually the poor and marginalized. So they, especially the ones who did not have friends or family to support them. And yet they still, the patients, not the patients, but the physicians did not care. Or maybe there were some that did care and they were just going off of the practices of the day. This is actually the hospital where they start this therapy where basically you are just spun around until until you're sane. So I don't know. I I tend to think that generally these, after a while, these doctors just were like whatever, and they just did what they did to these people. So let me turn my page. The reason they had these manacles, by the way, and these locks and stocks is because corporal punishment, that is, let's say beating the brakes off of somebody, was believed to shock the patients out of, say, dementia. Now, as someone who has a grandma with dementia, that might just piss them off. Like, that's going to make the situation worse. So I don't know. I don't know where that logic come from. Like, if we beat him, he'll be all right. Horrible British accent. Sorry about that. I could do better, but I don't have the time. So, isolation was also a treatment thought to help the patient, come to their senses. So, yeah, great move, guys. Let's put this person who is having delusions in a room by themselves with no toilets, or okay, that's another thing. They said they had like facilities, but the facilities were really just what literally called piss buckets. So there's that. So to further the torture, the diet of the patients consisted of bland foods. So no fruits or vegetables. So they're not even getting a balanced meal. And the reason they weren't doing this is because a rich diet was believed to restore the body to or rather, lack of a rich diet was believed to restore the body to balance and to restrain their spirits. So they were breaking these people's spirits by starving them, which, as we know, is a wonderful practice for, treating the mentally ill. They also call them the mentally insane or the insane, which we don't use that word anymore in that respect. So what happens when a broken spirit passes into the next world as or you know, a broken spirit and a broken person into the next world? They become ghosts. So during World War II, and this freaks me out. Like it's you know, it's just freaky. During World War II, part of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force was stationed inside the Imperial War Museum, which was which housed the mental hospital in 1815. So the women who were stationed there reported being unable to sleep due to moaning and rattling of chains. And these reports got so bad that that the powers that be were like, all right, we need to move these ladies because nothing is going to get done. So then there's the ghost of Rebecca. So the story goes that a young woman fell in love with an Indian man that came to live with her family. It is said that she fell in love with him, but he did not feel the same way. And on his departure, he would simply place a gold sovereign in her hand and then he was gone. So, due to his departure, and I would argue to say the fact that maybe he didn't show enough love to her, she would essentially snap and she was sent to Bethlehem Hospital. So, that gold sovereign would stay in her hand until her death. And at that point, her death, it was stolen from her and she was subsequently buried without the coin. So immediately after this, people began to see the spectral visage of a woman roaming the halls of the hospital, seemingly searching for her coin. Um, but yeah, like that story, while it sounds a little flowery and sort of fake, that's still pretty creepy to see like a woman floating around the hospital and you know that she's dead, like she's no longer with us. Um but there was one other story that I could talk about, but I don't have all the details. But I would encourage you to look this up. This is a story. This is like the first time I heard like the first haunted London story I heard involved this house in this well off area called Mayfair. And the story is that, there was something wrong with that freaking house. Like they had a maid who I think the maid lost her mind that worked there. Two sailors spent the night there, and I think one of them threw himself out a window and died. Like it's bad. So I would encourage you to look up the Mayfair story. I may do a TikTok on it. But yeah, that is haunted London for you. But if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Also leave a comment. If you're a Londoner and you want to hear more London stories from an American woman, follow me. And yeah. So the next video, we're going back down to Savannah. I promise this is my last Savannah video. We're going to talk about Tybee Island and how freaking haunted it is. So I can't wait to show y'all that. Hopefully I'll be able to do it live down there. But if not, I'm still gonna do it, and we'll just be up here in Atlanta. So I will see you on the next episode of Painted Haint. Merry Christmas and bye.